Nazareth is and what his cross and his resurrection mean for humanity. And so Paul uses terms like redemption, reconciliation, atonement, all manner of terms, not only that come out of the Old Testament background, but terms that might appeal to the people among whom he lives. Redemption, for example, the giving up of slavery, putting away your chains, taking off your chains and being a free person. Paul uses that imagery for how Christ enters into our life. And maybe that imagery still works for us to this day. But perhaps as you go through your prayer life, as you go through your contemplation of the place of Jesus of Nazareth in your life, perhaps you come up with images that make sense to you, that once you felt estranged or out of sorts, or you weren't fully, completely yourself, and now in Christ you are becoming fully yourself, however it works for you. But continue on to search in that direction. Even as Matthew searched for imagery to use in his time and with his people, so you too and I continue to search for ways in which to speak about the incredible power of Jesus Christ in our lives. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
You have been listening to Musings from the High Desert with Father Gabriel Rochelle. Contemplations on Orthodox Christianity from Las Cruces, New Mexico. This has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio on the web at ancientfaith.com.
Boldly proclaiming the truth of the risen Christ. This is Ancient Faith Radio, timeless Christianity 24 hours a day.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich, a live listener call-in show where we share the stories of everyday Orthodox people as we get to know the members of the body of Christ. Join the conversation. We invite you to call in with questions at 1-855-AF-RADIO, 1-855-237-2346.
And welcome to Everyday Orthodox. It is Sunday, September 20th, and we are live on Ancient Faith Radio. I'm Elisa Bielatich. This is Everyday Orthodox. We get together here every Sunday night on Ancient Faith just to meet someone new, to meet a new everyday Orthodox person. And, you know, I find that Orthodox people are fascinating. I love to go to coffee hours or different conferences, and I meet people, and you just ask, oh, where are you from? What do you do? And it's amazing, the really fascinating stories that surround us. And of course, we have people from faraway lands and people who grew up in immigrant families and a lot of converts who've come from all different diverse sort of areas and found the faith in different ways. And I just think we're an interesting crowd. So I'm always happy to meet someone else on a Sunday night. So we are live tonight. Bobby Maddox is right here in the studio taking your calls. So you can call and join the conversation. The phone number is 1-855 AF Radio. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can call us or you can go in the chat room. It's live, ancientfaith.com/radio/live. You are going to find the chat room, the phone calls. You're welcome to join us at any point. We'd love to hear from you. I'm excited because I'm thrilled to be introducing you to another exciting person tonight. Now, her name is Ginny Newsman, and I'm going to let her tell you the whole story, but she's actually responsible for, she wrote a book. She put together a book after she converted, which is awesome. But she's responsible for the Antiochian.org website. And I know that so many of us Orthodox, when we are searching for information on different things, we go to the big jurisdictional sites, and Antiochian.org is a great site and a great repository of resources and information. So, right up front, Ginny, thank you for doing that. That's a wonderful ministry. And let's get started. Ginny, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Lisa. It's nice to be here. And thank you for all that you do at Ancient Faith. I love everything that you guys are about, your podcasts, your blogs, which I love to pop into regularly. In fact, the thing that's been keeping me during this COVID time is, of all things, I ordered the Journal of Thanksgiving, not knowing how useful it was going to be during this time. I started it in February and later looked back and thought, that's interesting that God had that right there for me.
Isn't that remarkable?
A journal of gratitude, right?
That's
In the
right.
midst
That's
of
right.
everything. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Nicole Rokas put that together, and she's really a neat person. And it was kind of funny because when it was coming out just at the end of 2019, I was like, "Oh, Nicole, that's really neat." And she's like, "Gosh, I almost forgot that we ever did that because I'm kind of on to the next project." And it was literally, it was just like God planted it at exactly the right moment so that at the beginning of 2020, we could all start just really journaling and thinking about what we have to be grateful for.
Thankful
It is
for.
good timing for it. Yeah, absolutely. So that's right. That's really a great journal. I have it and I'm not doing it. And Jenny, I think you're right. This is the year for it.
Tisk, tisk.
Exactly. I mean, it's so funny. It was on my desk. I think I did it for a week, and I'm bad with those things. I got to get back to it. But so Jenny, tell me, I know that you're on the West Coast now, and you've lived in a lot of different places. Where were you born? Did you start out in California?
I did. I was born in beautiful Santa Barbara, California, which I still consider my hometown. And if you haven't been there, go. It's just a beautiful Mediterranean enclave there with the ocean on one side and the mountains on the other. My father was a professor at the time at Westmont College, which is an evangelical school in Santa Barbara. That's how I started my life. I was there for the first 4 years. And then my dad, who had always had a call to missions, he had been raised as a missionary kid as well as a Methodist preacher kid. So there he was in the middle of his life. He had tenure at Westmont College and just felt the call to the mission field. So when I was 4, we moved to the Philippines. I have some very early memories of landing at the dock, of seeing horse-drawn carriages that were still being used at the time to transport people around in Old Manila. Sort of even then noticing as a child the different cultural things around me, and the drive to our new home there, which was at a radio station just outside of Manila. My dad took a job as the director of the classical radio station for the Far East Broadcasting Company, which was a Protestant outreach into Manila. And so we lived in a former military compound that had been turned into homes for missionaries. And that's how I grew up. I lived there. We owned a home in Santa Barbara. We would come back every couple of years. But primarily, I grew up there in the Philippines until I was 17.
Wow.
So I was, I'm part Asian, I guess you could say.
I'm absolutely 13 years. Those are some formative years that you spent there.
Very.
That is, so it was a military housing area. Was it like a little kind of a commune of for lack of a better word, a little community of all missionaries that all lived together in the same little place? Oh,
It was. That's a really good way to express it. It was like having extended family all around with all the good and the bad that comes with that. But you felt very secure as a child because your neighbors were all involved in the same work that your parents were involved in. We had a really strong international community there because I grew up in the shadow of the Iron Curtain, as we called it, where the communist repression that was going on in Russia and in other parts of Eastern Europe. And my father's radio station broadcast the gospel back into those countries. So see, I have a lot of radio in me. I used to walk over when I was a kid to the studio and see my dad in the studio doing his broadcasts. So it was, and I'm a third culture kid, which they've done a lot of studying on third culture kids now, similar for a kid who's in the military or whose dad is in business and they work overseas, so that the family goes with, and you become something different. And they say that you're most comfortable not in your home country, not in your other country that you grew up in, but on an airplane between two places.
Well, and it's true. I mean, really, that's an experience only shared by that little enclave of missionaries and international people. And I have some friends who they're expats, right? You just call them expats, and they move around, and their kids are always at international schools. And this year they're in Holland, and next year they're in Switzerland. But it's like, it's kind of the same, because you transport this interesting little expat, like people who are sort of uprooted community, and you never really take root in the new place, but you're also not at home either. That's kind of amazing. So do you feel like, I think that's interesting when it's the idea that you're not comfortable at home or in the Philippines. Either place is not really fully home. Do you feel like that? Or is it now that you've been back for so long that you feel comfortable in the US? Or is there like a lingering feeling?
Not too much anymore. I think that lingered into my 20s.
Wow.
But that was about it.
Okay.
So, you do become acclimated, but I do remember as a young mom being in a suburb in the Midwest and looking around and thinking, what am I doing here? It was just so different than, my own childhood. And, but you adjust.
Absolutely. Did it feel like maybe when you look at the difference between the two, did it feel like your childhood was more meaningful or maybe more adventurous, or, that there was something, if you had to say what your kids missed out on by not having that upbringing, what would it be?
Oh, adventurous is a good word. I mean, by the time I was 8 years old, I had been through Europe, the Holy Land, several spots in Asia. At the time, you couldn't fly from the Philippines directly back to the United States without stopping several places along the way. And so we spent time in Japan. We had sort of hopscotched across back to California. We always spent some time in Hong Kong. We would stop in Hawaii in our trips back and forth. And then my parents took some money that had been in the family and took us all through Europe. So many, many memories. And I remember being in the third grade in my public school in Santa Barbara, and the teacher asking for a show of hands of who had been outside of California. And there were only a couple of us. And then she wanted to know who'd been outside of the US. And maybe there were a few because of Canada and Mexico, and then who had been anywhere else, outside of the continent. And I was the only hand up. I mean, it's third grade,
Sure.
So then she said, now, Ginny, where have you been? And I started reciting the names of the countries. So, I think it does. It shapes you in ways large and small. Sometimes it's almost hard to put words to it. But I definitely sometimes would think with my kids, oh, I'm sorry that they haven't had some of that. On the other hand, everything that you do, every path that you take has strengths and weaknesses. And I think in a way, wanting my kids to have stability was more important to me, because I knew that along with the adventure and the wonderful aspects of having that other cultural experience, there comes some struggle. So it wasn't difficult for me to settle down in one town, and have our kids there. And we did make travel a priority. And so we really tried, as the kids got older, to encourage them to travel, then to take them on trips, so that that heritage continued of cross culture into the next generation, right? So
absolutely.
And then we became Orthodox, and that was a real cross cultural experience. So.
No kidding. It's funny now that you mention it, because I wonder if if the fact that you were a third culture kid actually helped you adjust to Orthodoxy as being so different. It would be interesting to see if you adjusted more easily than somebody else. Like, say, your husband, do you feel like you adjusted easily compared to maybe somebody else? Or was it harder because you had such a strong religious background?
Oh, yeah. Good questions. So my husband grew up in the Philippines too. So we met at
wow,
Faith Academy.
Okay. Right? Oh, that's so cool.
really wonderful, strong, academically and in every way, I would say, school K through 12 in outside of Manila called Faith Academy. And we both were students there. I went there from kindergarten all the way through, with the exception of the couple years that we were in the US. And then I met Tim there when I was maybe second grade and he was third, something like that. And so we had a very similar background. And then he went off to college, and then I went a year later, and we ended up both landing at Wheaton College in Illinois and reconnecting. So it's kind of an unusual story, but I would say that for both of us, I think that actually it really helped us to open our minds to the Orthodox Christian faith, because we were used to that jump across cultures. So yeah, I think it probably worked in our favor. I think the thing that was difficult is, as missionary kids, our lives were completely immersed in the evangelical world. And so we didn't grow up with mentors and the parents of our friends being in business and doctors and attorneys. They were all in Christian work. So that was our life. And, when we approached the Orthodox faith, there were a lot of people that did not understand, what we were doing. And we left one world and entered another, essentially. So it was a challenging time in that way.
I bet it was. Absolutely. So, well, we'll slow down a little bit before we get to that, because I do want to hear about sort of how that whole transformation happened for you guys. But so you were in Wheaton. Did your family come home from the Philippines altogether, or it was time for you to go to college, so you came back and went to Wheaton?
Well, I came back. I actually started at Westmont College because that was my family's school in Santa Barbara. And then I went on a visiting program to Wheaton, and I just kind of fell in love with Wheaton. It's such a Midwestern school in terms of values and the American culture. And, they also joke that they used to joke that Wheaton is the evangelical Mecca and C.S. Lewis is the patron saint. But I kind of fell for it because it was something like what I pictured from the movies college should look like. I mean, these beautiful old stone buildings and the seasons, which I had never experienced before. In the Philippines, there's two seasons, the rainy season and the dry season.
Right.
And Santa Barbara, California is basically one season with some subtleties, subtle changes. So I just loved everything. I loved the crunchy fall leaves and, wearing thick sweaters and the snow when it came. And I really felt like I was on a movie set, sometimes. Incredible tradition there, actually academically. And I was a lit major. So amazing literature department there. I still remember, it just left its mark on me. I still remember the things that I learned, both in the classroom and also at the chapels, which were beautiful. They had a beautiful chapel. Have a beautiful chapel there. And so it was definitely like California girl meets, Lake Michigan wind chill or something,
Now, when you study at Wheaton, like your degree was in literature, so it's not a religious degree. I always think of Wheaton degrees as always being religious degrees. Like, do you still study? Are the actual studies imbued with a lot of religious content in a Christian school like that? Or are you kind of doing like a regular literature degree that doesn't look that different, but the community is religious?
That's interesting. I would say in the lit major, maybe if you were a business major, it wouldn't be like this, but in the lit major, it would be impossible for me to separate the Christian faith from the things that we talked about and the way we approach literature. Mm-hmm. And part of what's great about that is that how do you look at the old writers and not understand and discuss the Christian faith? How do you do Dante's Inferno? How do you actually look at those texts and not be able to talk about the Christian faith? And then that's also where I got into some of the modern myth, not just C.S. Lewis, but Tolkien and, George MacDonald and some of those other writers, and gain an appreciation for that. And it definitely was woven into my studies. at the time I was there, you had a biblical studies requirement. You didn't get a minor in it or anything, but you just had to take a certain set number of classes. So they did include that, that Bible study part of in the curriculum. But definitely studying literature there was rich. They have, they have a real tradition of the C.S. Lewis kind of school, Oxford school, and real connections there. And
oh, that's neat. That's neat. I bet that sounds like a great education, frankly, and hard to find these days. So very cool. Okay, so you're in Wheaton, you're studying literature, and you reconnect with an old friend who did the two of you start dating right away when you met back up in college, or was it one of those like long, slow burn kind of situations?
Well, yeah, it goes. So we knew each other in high school, and he was in love with my best friend. So we got to know each other that way, actually. And then we dated a little bit in high school. He kind of took a break from pursuing my best friend, and the two of us went out for a little bit and then kind of went our separate ways. So we had sort of this interesting history, right? So when we saw each other again, I don't think either of us were really realizing we were going to bump into each other. And I remember exactly where I was standing and almost what I was wearing when he walked by. And I said, "Tim, Newsman." And so we gave each other a hug and started chatting. And, it was just a course of probably about 6 months. He says, well, I was like the girl next door. He'd known me since we were little. He was friends with my brothers in school, and our families knew each other. And, he didn't think of me in that way,
Right.
but we spent time reconnecting. And the interesting thing is we had years in the interim where we hadn't seen each other, and we had both done a lot of growing and changing, obviously, like you do between the ages of 18 and 22. And so when we reconnected, there was a very strong connection there, after a couple of months of kind of breaking the ice and everything. So we started dating and dated through college, and then got married a couple of months after we graduated. So.
That's neat. Okay. All right. So what was the plan when you guys finished up? Did you consider, by the way, being missionaries like your parents had been?
We did. We thought about it. The interesting thing is that Tim in the summers had gotten involved with a company at the time was called the Southwestern Book Company. And it's a company that works with college students, only with college students, and trains them in sales, in door-to-door sales. He had stumbled into this and become a student manager and put his way through school, basically working summers with this job. They had amazing sales training that IBM and other companies used to send their people to, even though they just worked with college students. So he stumbled into business. It really wasn't what he thought he was going to be heading towards. He thought he might be in ministry, maybe be a pastor or work for a Christian organization. And after we graduated from Wheaton, he actually put out a couple applications in that direction, and nothing happened. And he ended up working in business and sales again. So it's kind of how God works. It wasn't the way he started out with his thinking. I, on the other hand, have had like this straight line. I wanted to be a writer and editor from the time I was probably like in the 4th grade. And I was in an organization called Pioneer Girls, and somebody who grew up in the Protestant world would know what that is, but it was like a girls' club, like Girl Scouts. And my sponsor at the time gave me a book and said, "This is for write in this book." And I don't know why she did that, but I started writing poetry, really bad poetry.
I think everyone starts bad, to tell you the honest truth. Like, I think you could get famous poets and put together all of their like first 45 poems would all be horrible. I'm confident.
I think mine are still like, I don't usually show my poems to people, but I love poetry. I love the spare words, just putting a lot of things into a few words. And so I do it now just for myself. But that started very early. And so I had that straight line. And, I knew I was going to major in lit, and I did. And I edited the papers in school, both in, high school and college. And then I started freelancing when I got out of college. And here I am, right? So still doing similar work. And so that wasn't a surprise. Yeah.
Well, there you go. So so where did you guys end up heading? Like what happens next?
Well, okay, so we got married, and I think because we were missionary kids and we didn't necessarily have a natural hometown, and at least Tim's parents, I think, were still in the Philippines. Mine were kind of on the way back to the US at that point because my dad was getting a little older and he worked for the home office of the mission after he moved back to Santa Barbara. But Tim ended up taking a job that kept us in the Wheaton area for a couple of years. Which was really nice because we stayed around, the college that had become home for us, and lived in the community. It's a wonderful community. And we lived close enough to campus. I still remember as a young mom, you could hear they have the chimes that go off every 15 minutes. And so just keeping that toe in the door there. And we still attended College Church, which had been the church that we had gone to when we were students there. So that was a nice, stable start for us. And our first two kids were born there in the, greater Chicago area. And then Tim got interested in commercial real estate and started talking about making a career change. And we said, you know what? Our family's all out west. So if you're going to change your career, maybe we should move back there, because at that point we were parents and we really wanted our kids to know their grandparents. And that was not going to happen with them on the West Coast and us in Chicago area. So it took a certain amount of pluck. We were in our mid-20s. We were just, I look back and I just think we were just babies,
Yes.
But we moved, he flew out and did some interviews up and down the coast of California. And that's how we ended up in Silicon Valley. And he ended up going to work for a company, Saratoga Investment Company, and jumping into the commercial real estate world. And so we ended up
and it
back in
does take some
California.
pluck. It does take some pluck, because you guys really had you had so much stability at Wheaton, right? Like and you hadn't had quite a home base other than that. It's hard to pick up and go somewhere where you don't have family, you don't have the school, you don't have the group of missionaries, you don't have anybody, right? You're just on your own.
Yeah. No, you're right. It really was. Looking back on it now, I think it was one of the biggest decisions that we made, because sometimes we say, if we had stayed there, would we have discovered the Orthodox Christian faith? Of course, you look back at those forks in the road and you ask yourself those questions, but it was in Silicon Valley that we discovered the Orthodox Christian faith. So, but we love the Midwest. Actually, I still think it's a great place to raise a family. They're just salt of the earth,
Yeah,
So.
I completely agree. I love the Midwest. If I have to move somewhere, that'll be my next stop. I don't love the cold.
There you go.
So I'm a little torn, but I don't hate it. But but it's chilly, and the closer you get to the lakes, you get that wind going. It's very cold. But we are going to take a short break. We're going to take a little break and listen to a couple of announcements, and then we will be right back with Ginny Newsman, and we're going to find out how they came to find Orthodoxy, and how Ginny came to just be publishing an Orthodox book right away. So we'll be right back.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bieletich will be back in a moment. Give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF Radio.
Hi, this is Father Evan Armatas, priest at St. Spiridon Greek Orthodox Church in Loveland, Colorado, and the host of the Ancient Faith Radio Sunday night call-in show, Orthodoxy Live. I am pleased to announce today the release of my first book for Ancient Faith Publishing, titled Toolkit for Spiritual Growth, a practical guide to prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. It seeks to provide a guide to the three basic and primary disciplines of Orthodox spirituality. Through these disciplines, Christ opened for us a path that frees us from the disordered way of life that has become normal for many, even though their hearts and minds tell them otherwise. Please join me in exploring the three-legged stool of Orthodox spiritual practice: prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Books now available at store.ancientfaith.com. And the title, once again, is Toolkit for Spiritual Growth. I look forward to sharing it with you. God bless.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Elisa.
And welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. We're here tonight with Jenny Newsman, and you're welcome to call in. You know, we've got Bobby Maddox in here answering your calls. It's 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. But we've talked about Jenny grew up child of missionaries in the Philippines, came back, went to Wheaton, was a very nice Protestant girl, studying religious topics and completely unsullied by this weird Eastern faith. But, so the two of you are young and married, and you mentioned you were a young mom, hearing the bells of the school still. How many kids did you have in Illinois before the two of you, or I guess more of you, before your little family took the big leap and moved out to Silicon Valley?
So we had our Annie Dawn, and then we had April Elizabeth. So we had two of our three daughters when we moved, and April was just a baby. She was about 5 months old. So
excellent. So were you planning to have a big family at that point? When you got married, what were you envisioning?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, not at all.
I'm curious because I know where you ended up.
And that's so interesting to think about. But I was the youngest child. I have a sister and three brothers. And as the youngest, you don't really get a lot of exposure to small children. And I did not choose to babysit in high school. I think I probably can count on one hand the number of times I babysat, only when I was really desperate for money. So I think if you had asked me when we first got married, I would have said two, with almost like it's a stretch, right, to think of that. And that's one of the ways I think that life is so great, because we really grow into things. We change so much as we go along on the journey. And we had the two girls, and it took me a couple of years. I remember just thinking of myself as a mom and just giving myself over to that discipline. Of course, you have to do it, and the job is there. But for me, really internally, to embrace it and to love it, it took a while. It's a big responsibility when you first start out. I always say that there's this kind of progression in life. You think you're a pretty nice person, and then you get married, and
Yes.
then you still basically think you're a nice person, and then you have children.
Yep.
And then you still, think you're okay. And then you have teenagers, right? So it's like all of this stuff causes, your own weaknesses and things to bubble up. But yeah, so after a couple of years, by the time we moved to California, I had really embraced parenting and was really enjoying the girls. I loved those years with just the two. But then, my husband, this is the way my husband tells it, and I guess this may be true, but, April got to be about 4, and I kind of got this look in my eye and looked at my husband, or maybe I was holding a baby. I don't know. But we were young, we weren't even 30. So we had plenty of time to have more children. And so we had little Allison. And then, when she was about 1, my husband says, I got that look in my eye anyway. Then we had our first boy. So by the time I was about 32, 33, we had 3 girls and a boy. And then some more years went by, and then we had 2 more wonderful little guys, John Patrick and Andrew. And by that time I was almost 40. So then it was time to hang up the baby. Baby period. But yeah.
Oh, that's great. That is wonderful. So, okay. So you head over to Silicon Valley. Where were you guys? And was that kind of a culture shock for you? Because we were just talking about how beautiful the Midwest is and how wonderful the people are. Californians are great too, but it's different, right? It's a very different culture.
Very different. And yes, it was a culture shock. Yeah, very much so. And I actually hadn't thought about that for a while, but it was like night and day. you know, California, the weather's so great and people are outdoors a lot and all that's really nice. But I found it a little harder to get to know people in the Midwest. You're inside a lot for a portion of the year, and there's a lot of gatherings and times when you're sitting around the fire, getting to know people, that sort of thing. I also found that where we were in Silicon Valley was pretty unchurched, and so there was no residual Christianity. Nobody in our neighborhood went to church. I didn't meet Christians, in casual encounters with people. That was something I was very used to in the Midwest. And so it was really a refining time for me in terms of my faith. And just at the same time that I'm really entering into motherhood and the hard questions that kids ask about God when they get to be 3, 4, and 5 years old. So I went through a period of questioning and kind of going back to the basics with my own faith, recommitting myself and my mothering to being there for our kids spiritually. And it was good, but it was hard, and I'm sure a lot of people who listen to your podcasts, who doesn't have at least one or two experiences like that in life where you've been thrust into something and it's just like a polar dip or something. And you can look back later and see the grace of God was there, in the people that I was meeting. But it was a very challenging transition for me.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. I'm absolutely sure that it was. I also had young kids in the same general vicinity, and it's very unchurched, I think, surprisingly compared to the rest of the country. And so you do end up deciding, you either sort of decide to dedicate your household and kind of put your brain to it, or you kind of let go of it. And so I would imagine for you, that's especially hard because you had grown up in this missionary community where everyone was so faithful and everyone was on the same page. And then you're at Wheaton where everyone is Christian, everyone, I would assume, right? And everyone, or at least the majority, and everyone is actively talking about their faith. And you've been in all of these communities where Christianity is intentionally nurtured and spoken and expressed. And all of a sudden you're in a place where you're not really meeting anyone who's Christian. What did you guys do, like church-wise? Were you able to find a community that worked for you, or what ended up happening?
Good question. I think actually now, even just you framing it that way, it helps me to see that moving to California was really the beginning of us becoming Orthodox, because we said, oh, okay, now we have to find a church. And so we started looking and we got involved and joined small groups and everything. But what we were really asking was the bigger questions. What is the church? And where do you find it? And what does it look like? And so we were Presbyterians for a while. And I think the reason we ended up in the Presbyterian church is because really we were looking for depth. We were looking for something that wasn't just invented last week. We had visited a few mega churches when we came out to Silicon Valley, and it just wasn't our cup of tea, with a TV camera going up and down the aisles while people were singing praise songs. It was just very disorienting to us. So I think that it was that dipping into a couple different traditions after we moved to California to try to discover what it was we were, because we had always been in a very interdenominational situation and in interdenominational churches in the evangelical world. That's very common. So I didn't know, was I a Baptist? What was I? Was I a Methodist? I didn't even know, I like love Christ and,
I like how you say though, that it sort of put the onus on you to be in this culture that was not Christian. Like I like how you said it, there was no residual Christianity, that there's a post-Christianness to the culture out there, right? And so you kind of, it puts an onus on you to decide and to figure it out and to to do all the work. Whereas when you're at Wheaton, or if you're in a community of missionaries, the work's done for you. Right? Like
Right.
the
That's right.
school or your parents or whoever, they've all decided what church is. They all know what worship is, and you can just follow along. But then I do think in so many ways, it's very interesting for a young couple, newly married, to move away, and probably for a single person too, just because I didn't do that, but to move away from your home culture and your home family. And when you're transplanted like that, there's a real degree of intentionality for everything, and especially the faith, that you have to make those choices and you have to decide, what are you going to do? So it sounds like you were kind of navigating toward older and older, like more and more liturgical traditions. What happened?
So, wow, what happened is we were in this Presbyterian church, and we were in a small group of families that were really close. We were all homeschooling together, having our baby showers as the next baby would come along, and sharing our lives. It was actually really a wonderful chapter in the sense that we found a community in the midst of what was feeling a little bit like a desert spiritually. And within this group, there was a couple that had, through a series of circumstances, started attending kind of an Orthodox startup church. And we were concerned about them, don't you know? What was this thing, In fact, at the time, the strangest thing, Elisa, is that we lived around the corner from the biggest Orthodox church in Silicon Valley, the big Greek Orthodox Church.
St. Nicholas?
Yes.
Yep.
And we were so ignorant that we would go on our family bike rides by there, and we'd look. Oh, look at Tim. What is that? I think it's a branch of Catholicism or something. That's one of the things that floors me now, is just how ignorant we were. And nobody's fault. It's just we had no clue what Eastern Orthodoxy was. Well, we really did think it was a branch of Catholicism.
Absolutely. And Orthodoxy is kind of invisible in California. It's there, but you don't see it. I remember now growing up, I had a friend who was Greek, and he had icons in his house, and I never thought about it. But, I always have friends who say, "Oh, you're from California. You must have loved going to see St. John Maximovich and I'm like, you know what? I drove up and down Geary all the time. Yeah. Never had any idea that was there. I never thought twice about it. And it is an interesting thing, because it's like an underground community, and you don't know that you can literally walk right past and not know. Whereas I think in the Midwest, you get like a Serbian community and a Greek community, and they're kind of more visible. But in California, somehow it's like everybody's undercover. So
yeah, that's a really interesting observation, but true, I think. Yeah.
But and I assume, like, you had never heard about, like St. John being right there. His relics are right around the corner, and all the Orthodox people are like, "Oh, San Francisco, joy of all who sorrow." And we're out there living out there right nearby,
clue.
I don't know what you're talking about. But,
no clue.
So they're going to like a little mission startup parish there.
So they're in this church, and it's Antiochian actually, and so they start talking about it. And the priest that was guiding the mission at the time, Father John Braun, who was out of the AEOM movement that came into Orthodoxy years prior, he's just a dynamic teacher and leader. And so our friends got the guys in the group, because we used to meet, the women would meet 1 week, and then the guys would meet 1 week. So the guys met with Father John. He said, "Hey, you guys, okay, you're asking me all these questions. I can't answer them, but here's a guy who can. So come and hear him, So a bunch of them did. And Tim came home, and he had some kind of manuscript in his hand about somebody who'd converted to Orthodoxy that he was going to read. And he stayed up till, 4 a.m. reading it. And I mean, I still had no idea what it even was, right? But he immediately, I don't know what it was. I think he was just ready, and he just was immediately drawn. So of course, I'm like, oh man, by this time, we have 4 children. And so what are you doing here, dear? So, but I said, okay, I'll visit. So we all went. Oh, I can't even describe my first service. I just well, for one thing, they were meeting in an auditorium, and a Protestant high school auditorium, so it wasn't really, I didn't really get a traditional first experience. But it was just, everything was so different. I mean, why is the priest, why are we looking at his back, and why are they singing all this stuff instead of reading it? And then they come around the great entrance. Why are they doing that? It's just, I had never seen anything like it. And I thought I had a broad exposure, to things. So we left, and Tim said, well, come on, sweetie. I didn't like beer the first time I tried it either. So
that's awesome.
But, I'm a reader, and I saw what was going on with my husband. So I thought, okay, I'm going to read, I can do that. And I just read everything. I just devoured all the usual books.
Out of curiosity, which ones? Which ones stand out?
Timothy Ware and Father Peter Gilquist's book, Becoming Orthodox, and and then the Apostolic Fathers had a tremendous impact on me, because reading the original writings, you read the writings and you say, this is not the evangelical church here. It's something else, right? And so I could see the continuity between that and this meeting on Sunday morning that seems so strange, or this liturgy that seems so strange. So, so I just read, and Father John was a wonderful mentor. We'd have him over, and we'd sit him on the couch, and then we'd just throw all our questions at him. He said, Ginny Newsman, when you die, I'm going to stand by your grave, and I'm going to throw in all the rest of these, and you can take them up to the Lord. He's got a great sense of humor.
You can ask him all these questions.
Right. But it was just great. Over time. And I think participation in the liturgy, really, when we went through Holy Week, I mean, what can you say about Holy Week? I realized I have never experienced anything like this as a Christian. And so it was the combination of a year's worth of attending, and then just the reading, and just having people that were very compassionate with us. And I think it was pretty important that they came from the same background we did, because he knew what I was going to ask almost before I asked it, and the things that I would be negatively reacting to, whether it was the saints or the Theotokos, or, just the concept of liturgy itself. And
right. And he understood the vocabulary. When you said salvation, you meant something different than he meant. And he knew that and saw it coming and could adjust with you. But, that is really a value. That's a neat thing. But I agree. I think there's some, attending the liturgy. I remember when I was converting, standing in the liturgy and hearing it in English for the first time, and listening and thinking, I really can't object to any of this. It's and then as you stand there, it changes you, and you begin to see that. That's wonderful. So over the course of a year, is that what happened? You guys spent a nice year going through the liturgical year and studying, and then you were chrismated at the end, or maybe baptized.
Yeah, the kids were baptized, and we were chrismated, and oddly enough, Elisa, the date was September 11. Wow. So that is when we joined the church. So that's,
and back at that time, it was not a big deal, right? But now it just feels like that's such a big day.
Such a weighty day.
So written on our hearts now in a different way.
And it's interesting, because my parents and several family members came to our chrismation and the kids' baptisms, and it was a long service. I don't know that it was that wise for me to invite them, but they were my family, and I know they love me, and they're Christians. And I rode home with my dad. It was just the two of us, and who I have enormous respect for. And I said, Dad, what'd you think? And he said, he's kind of quiet. At this time, he was still serving on the leadership level at a Protestant church where he lived. And he said, it's very Christ-centered, honey. I read the Bible, and I don't really see those things about Mary or about the saints, but I can tell that the important things are in place. And the other thing he said is, if you lived in my area, I don't know where I could tell you where to, I could not recommend a church to you
Ooh.
anymore, essentially.
Wow.
So that was meaningful to me, both that he recognized the Christ-centered nature of it, and also that he was putting his finger on something, which is the church is changing so much that he doesn't even recognize it.
Yes.
You know?
Well, and I think, I mean, that phrase to say, someone like your dad says that it's Christ-centered, that is the ultimate compliment, frankly. You know,
That's right.
from you know, I know if my mom were to say we're Christ-centered, I'd be like, yes, fantastic. She has not said that yet. She has not said that, but perhaps one day. But no, I think that's a big compliment, and that's probably a testament also to your priest, who understood what it's like to convert, and who got your parents a bit and was able to communicate that to them. So that's also a big blessing. It's wonderful. So you've converted, you have your kids, and then 15 minutes later, you're publishing a book with Conciliar Press, which is now Ancient Faith Publishing, right? What happened? How did that work out?
Oh, well, so another thread we haven't talked about is that from the time I graduated Wheaton, I started freelance writing. And so I'd been, even through having the children, I had continued to write and edit. And so I had kind of a nice spot with a couple of Christian evangelical publishers that I worked for, Tyndale House, David C. Cook, names that are familiar to people in the evangelical world. I did book reviews for Christian Parenting Magazine and profiles, interviews. In fact, it's very odd being interviewed because I'm usually the one that's doing the interviewing. but so so I started, of course, a lot of the things I had read were from Conciliar Press, and we lived in Silicon Valley. And at the time, Conciliar Press was located 45 minutes away. So they had a wonderful bookstore at the press. And my husband was up there browsing through stuff. And I guess somebody came out who worked for the press, and he said, "Oh, you need to talk to my wife." He's my salesman, you know. So through that, I connected with Conciliar and ended up working on that book. Really, I mean, talk about soon, the stories of women who've come to the Orthodox faith. I think it was 2 years after our chrismation or something like that.
But it's a book about converts, right? I mean, it would be different if you had come in and a year or two later wrote a book about how to be Orthodox. But a book about women who convert, you were an expert at that point.
Yeah. Yeah,
because you were one of them.
It was actually fine for that very reason. You're right. It was. I mean, it's changed so much. I could not write that book now. I mean, Orthodoxy after 26 years sinks down in and is deeper and in some ways harder to express than those were my initial responses to it, right? Because my story's in there too. But it's been a real blessing, I have to say, and you probably have this with being involved in this work, that you go and you meet someone somewhere and they say, "Oh, this or that thing was really helpful that you worked on." And it's totally the Holy Spirit, because we have no control over that, you know.
Absolutely.
We just put out the work or the thoughts or the writing, and then we just trust that God will have it, water and make fruitful in the places where it's supposed to. It's nothing that we can do in our own strength, but it's really a blessing. To this day, all these years later, I will meet someone in a fellowship hall somewhere or something, and they'll say, "Oh, your book," or guys tell me, "Oh, that book was helpful for my wife," which really means a lot to me when I hear that. So
absolutely. Well, and it's true, God does wonderful things. You just sort of put out that stuff, and then God does stuff with it. It's wonderful. It's amazing.
His grace.
Absolutely. And so how did you end up working with the website at Antiochian for the Antiochian jurisdiction? Because I should say, I mentioned earlier Antiochian.org. That's the official website of the Antiochian jurisdiction here in America, right?
Right. So
how did they pull you in?
Well, I started after I'd been with Conciliar for about 10 years. We had a lot going on in our family. We were moving our in-laws closer to take care of them. Our daughter was getting married. So I went ahead and resigned to have a period of time when I wasn't, trying to do work and other things too. And then a former coworker contacted me and said, there's this opening at Antiochian.org. And I said, I don't know anything. I was picturing, technical work. I said, I don't know anything about that. And they said, no, we'll teach you. And so that was just a very random kind of thing. And actually in my work life, that has mostly happened. Things just kind of drop down. I have a resume and I've occasionally used it, but it's just been, here comes the next thing. And that's the way that was. And I jumped in and I started learning how to manage, a website and learning about content management systems and how to do postings and how the web is different, which it really is, than writing articles for magazines like what I had been doing. And I had, again, the blessing then of getting to know people within the Archdiocese in a different way, because we did a lot of interviews. We have done a lot of interviews. And then we went through the sorrowful loss of Metropolitan Philip and the joyful, enthronement of Metropolitan Joseph. And so now I've been in the role of editing there for over 11 years. And I have to say the Antiochian Archdiocese, Ancient Faith is a department, right? of the Antiochian Archdiocese. There's a very strong evangelistic spirit there in a lot of the priests and people. And it's a real blessing to be able to work with them. So
Absolutely. It's neat how each of our jurisdictions has kind of a different flavor. And it's true. The Antiochian jurisdiction is so much about reaching out to Americans and trying to speak the language that Americans speak. And it's a beautiful thing. It's wonderful. Mm-hmm. So tell me now, over the years, I know that, you've moved up to Oregon. Life has changed a bit. Now you have, how many kids do you have? And tell me, I want to hear, because I know that one of your kids recently got married, and I want to find out, what was the wedding like with coronavirus?
Oh my goodness, yes. This was quite a summer, because we moved here. We have a granddaughter that was born in June. Her parents are priest and presbytera, and she's child number 7 in that family. So,
wow.
and then, then our son, on the heels of that, was married at Holy Trinity in Portland. And now we have another grandchild that we're excitedly awaiting, who is going to be born in New Jersey at the end of October. So we've had a very busy, when you have a big family, you have kind of these years where it feels like everything just happens at once. And this is one of those years. But yeah, our son, so they were allowed, a certain small number in the church. They were allowed more outside. Fortunately, they had just eased the restrictions so that things, there were more people who could come. But, honestly, the sacrament is so beautiful, and you get inside the church and the service starts and you don't think about it. You don't think about COVID. Yeah. You don't think about who's wearing a mask out there or who isn't. You're just entering in, and I just think our Orthodox weddings are so beautiful and so amazing. And the reception, God was merciful. We had beautiful weather, and it's right on the river, and this beautiful afternoon. So it was great. It was great.
Fantastic. That's beautiful. It is. You're right. The sacrament is so beautiful. And I actually kind of wonder, sometimes with weddings, things get so big and it's so much about making everything just right that we miss the beauty of it. And we're so busy with the details. And, maybe in a way it's a blessing to be getting married at a time when you're not allowed to really throw a huge party. And, it's just a small group of you gathered in the church. Sometimes that's more beautiful.
Well, and the people in his wedding party was pretty sweet, because they said, there's so much joy in just being able to do something like this. This has been a tough time, right? For everyone. There's so much stress right now, and no one knew we were going to have all this go on this long. And I think for some people, it was the first social event that they'd done, maybe since COVID started.
Absolutely.
And so just full of joy. And you're right. I think that sometimes we lose the forest for the trees with the weddings, for sure. That the people I know who've had COVID weddings have said it's just very simple, but they're still, at the end of the day, they're still married, right? So
That's right. That's absolutely right. And in the end, I think maybe we're better off for it, as always, right? There are always silver
Right.
linings. Absolutely.
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely. So what are you up to these days? What are you doing? You're in
So
Portland. Where are you?
I am. We are on the western side of the river, if you know Portland. So across the
Yes.
street is the city of Beaverton. So that's how close we are to the
Beautiful.
next town
Oh,
over. It
you're
is
in
beautiful
really
here.
kind of one of the prettiest spots in the country, aren't you? You're really in a
It
beautiful.
is stunningly beautiful, actually, and we are enjoying that. And we live near some of our kids anyway, which was our goal, and that's a real joy. And I'm working part time for St. Vladimir Seminary. We didn't touch on the fact that Tim and I lived there for a couple of years, and we're big fans of St. Vladimir's, and I still work for them. So I work full time between the Antiochian Archdiocese and St. Vladimir's, and I'm Gigi. I'm grandma, and hoping to do a garden in the spring and keep writing in my journal of Thanksgiving here.
That's right. Head down, keep walking.
Right.
Glory to
Exactly.
God. Oh, that's fantastic. Jenny, I've so enjoyed getting to know you tonight and getting a chance to talk to you. I know that you and our paths kind of have almost crossed a couple of times. So I'm very
Yes.
grateful to get a chance to sit down and talk with you. And thank you
Me
to our
too.
audience for joining us. Thank you very much. We'll be back next Sunday night with another Everyday Orthodox person. And thanks, Jenny. Good night.
Thank you.
Get into the program. Of course, if you're listening again or listening to this program for the first time later on as a podcast, or even if you're listening live right now and you want to get to us with a question, you can do that by going to ancientfaith.com, clicking on the radio button, and there under live radio, if you scroll down to Orthodoxy Live, you'll find a blue microphone button. You can click that and record your question no matter where you are or when you're listening to this program. Even if you're listening to one of our archive shows, it's years gone by and you still have a question for us, it's a great way to send in your question. Of course, we encourage you to check out the other live programming that's available here on Ancient Faith Radio. And if you didn't get a chance to check out the interview that happened with Father Barnabas Powell just this past Thursday here on Ancient Faith. It was a live interview with myself and Father Barnabas. It's both an audio cast and a video cast. You can check that out at ancientfaith.com. We were talking about the release of my new book, Toolkit for Spiritual Growth, a practical guide to prayer, fasting, and almsgiving, available here at the store on Ancient Faith. If you haven't yet picked up your copy, highly encourage you to do that now. If you can, please purchase it through Ancient Faith Store. That helps support this ministry that comes to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and also helps make sure that not only is this broadcasting available, but the additional resources that Ancient Faith provides do come to you and to those who are searching for our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and His church. As I mentioned in the transition tonight between Alyssa's show and mine, we are going to be holding a national book study on Toolkit for Spiritual Growth. You just need a copy of the book, and if you can, read ahead. But on October 4th, November 1st, and December 6th, there'll be a special 2-hour edition of this show. The first hour being our normal Orthodoxy Live. We'll take your questions about anything about the Orthodox faith or teachings and her traditions. And in the second hour, we're going to be doing a book study on Toolkit for Spiritual Growth. We'll cover first prayer, then fasting, then almsgiving, wrapping up right in the midst, if you will, of the Advent fast as we move our way into the feast and celebration of our Lord's Nativity. So if you don't pick up the book in time, that's all right. You can still tune in. We'll be broadcasting live, and you can call in with any comments or questions about the book. And we look forward to hosting that. Well, as we get underway, once again, you're listening to Orthodoxy Live. It's November. It's September 20th, 2020. We're broadcasting live. We'd love to hear from you. We've got a couple open lines at 1-855-237-2346. We're going to go out to the phone lines, and Ella, welcome to the program.
Hi. How are you?
Hi, good, Ella. It's nice to have you on. Ella, I have a niece by the same name, and I don't know if you know this, but in Greek, your name means come, like come here.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, it's a great name. And I think I heard from you by email earlier this week or perhaps last week. Is that right?
Yep.
Ella, tell us where you're calling from.
I'm calling from my new house in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. We just moved here this past week, actually.
From where?
Kansas City, Kansas.
So what brought on the move from Kansas City to Cedar Rapids?
My dad got a new job. He's an electrical engineer at Collins Aerospace. Mhm.
Oh, wow. So Kansas, how many were you born and raised in Kansas City? Is that what you call home?
I was born and raised in Wichita, and then last summer we moved to Kansas City.
And then
He also got a new job there.
oh my goodness. So you've had a couple moves here in the last year or so.
Yeah.
That's
Been
never
crazy.
easy, right? But you're getting settled in then? You've been there a week?
Mhm.
And if I recall, you're in high school, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, what grade?
I'm going to be in 11th.
11th grade, so you're starting your junior year. That's a pretty important year. Start to take your college entrance exams, and your coursework's pretty hard. And I don't know if you're going through all of that or will be going through all of that this year.
Well, I'm homeschooled, so it's a little bit lighter.
Okay, a little lighter, but will you still take those entrance exams, or how does that work?
Well, currently I'm doing dual credits, so I'll do normal high school classes and then college classes with that as well.
I see. Do you have a field of study that you've already become interested in?
Right now I'm hovering between graphic design and missionary teaching.
Oh, wow. Well, actually you can do both, can't you? There's always the need for graphic design and mission work, and that combination is a beautiful one. I have an uncle who's a graphic designer, and what a beautiful field of study that is. And visual arts, such an important part of the church's life and teaching. There's a woman in our parish who finished seminary and also is a graphic designer, and she's done such beautiful work for the church. What a great field of study if that's where you end up. Well, Ella, tell us your question.
Well, I know we're supposed to use the gifts that God has given us, our natural talents. So I was wondering how one could use their creative writing skills, like storytelling, story creating, to benefit them in their faith and in the church as well.
Gosh, the minute you pose that question, my mind goes to 100 different places. One of the things that immediately comes to my mind, obviously, is writing. And writing from the perspective of, let's say, one thing that just jumps into my mind is it'd be really neat to see a series of books on the lives of the saints that were done more in a narrative style. We have what's called a whole classification of saints' lives called hagiography. And, these are stories that tell the lives of the saints. But how beautiful it would be if someone was to put those into novels or short stories. Most parishes now have, in our parish, for example, blog posting and article writing is a big part of how we communicate about the faith and with the faithful. And so, we've enlisted the writing skills of a couple people in our parish to post, and, it's an incredible ministry that they've started. I don't know if you're aware of biblical fiction. Are you aware of that genre?
No, not really.
Check out this author by the name of Jean Hoefling, Hoefling, Jean Hoefling, first name Jean. She's got some wonderful stuff. There's a book that my wife's reading right now on Judah. the author that I can't recall the name of the author, but these are stories that people write about biblical figures, not taking license, but trying to stay as close to what we know from the text about the people and doing some historical research and writing. It's a really creative way to engage people. I mean, if you look at what C.S. Lewis did, are you aware of the Chronicles of Narnia?
I am.
Are you aware of why he wrote them?
I am not.
So C.S. Lewis wanted to reintroduce Western culture to the wonder of meeting Christ. That's, Aslan is that Christ figure in his books. And he does a fabulous job of it,
Yeah.
He also wrote a series that has some titles like Hideous Strength and Perelandria. This was a series of works that he did, fiction works, to introduce us to the idea and the reality of spiritual warfare, which he also does in Screw Tape Letters. I don't know if you're aware of that book by him, or The Reality of Heaven and Hell, where he writes about in a book called The Great Divorce. So there's lots of avenues for a skill like that. Does that make sense to you? I mean, I've kind of talked for a bit, so I'll pause here.
No, that makes sense. That's a good suggestion. Kind of as you talk.
Yeah, I just think that there's a lot of opportunities for you with that skill set. And, obviously, if you learn to write well, and as creative writing and that, field of study, it also lends itself to telling, the stories and the theology of the church in an approachable style. I mean, I'm not a writer. I didn't ever take any writing courses, and so it was very painful for me to write a book, very hard for me to write a book. But if I had been trained, it would have obviously been a much easier process. And, the church is always in need of great authors, Yeah. Any follow-up to that, Ella, or any other questions?
Not unless you know how to fix creaky desk fans.
Creaky desk lamps? My guess would be fans. Oh, WD-40 for sure.
Okay. All right.
Ella, thanks for calling. I hope to hear from you again.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. Bye-bye. You have a good night as well. Again, you're listening to Orthodoxy Live here on Ancient Faith Radio. We do have open lines at 1-855-237-2346. We got a question that came in a couple of weeks ago from Bogdan. I think I'm saying that name correctly. I may not have it right. So our producer tonight's going to play this recorded question from Bogdan. Let's take a listen.
Hello, Father, and thank you for your great shows. My name is Bogdan. I live in Berlin, Germany, and I'm part of the German Archdiocese of the Romanian Orthodox Church. So I have a friend, he's also Orthodox, and he has a rather odd theory. He says that our Lord Jesus Christ renounced his divinity as long as he was on earth and got it back after the ascent in the heavens. So he also says that Jesus Christ didn't do anything out of his own power or authority, and that God the Father did everything through his Son, all the wonders and works. I have the feeling that this theory has Nestorian aspects, so I will be very happy if you could give us your opinion on this matter. Thank you.
Well, Bogdan from Berlin, thank you so much for listening. It's great to have you as one of the supporters of Ancient Faith Radio, and we're so thankful for our overseas listeners. For those of you who are overseas and want to pick up resources from Ancient Faith Radio, you can do that still in the store. Most of the recent works that are published under Ancient Faith are available digitally as well. So you can buy the download, including the recent book that came out, Toolkit for Spiritual Growth. This idea, we're going to take these one at a time. First, about the divinity of Christ, and whether or not while Christ was on earth, he had renounced before his incarnation his divinity, is, as you well surmise, an ancient heresy, but a heresy. So here, let me state that I'm not stating an opinion of the church, but a dogmatic position of the church. Big distinction. Often when I'm speaking on a matter of faith, I do have to give my pastoral perspective or opinion. And when I do that, what I might be offering is maybe edifying, but we couldn't say is dogmatic. In other words, it wouldn't raise to the level of being heretical if you oppose my perspective. On an issue like this, once we say Christ while on earth is not divine, we have, if you will, I hate to say this for your dear friend, stepped into an area that is heretical. The church would condemn such thinking, often in very strong terms, as we see both in its councils and its proclamations. But rather we say that Christ was fully God and fully man at the moment the Annunciation occurs. The fullness of God and of the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ, comes to dwell within the womb of Mary, who comes to be known as the bearer of God. And there you have it, the very title, Theotokos, bearer of God, was designated for Mary to defend against this heretical notion that she gave birth simply to a human being. Really, if we strip Christ of his divinity while he's on earth, we've basically stripped all power and meaning from his life. It is almost a nonsensical idea, the incarnation itself, and you can look at some of the great writings of the church, for example, on the incarnation by St. Athanasius the Great. Highly recommend that short work, and several other patristic works. Here I'm stepping away from, let's say, the dogmatic proclamations made in councils, but here into the writings of the fathers, and we find ample argument and argumentation towards the idea that Christ, Jesus Christ, the man, is also Jesus Christ, the God. So we say theanthropos is the Greek word, the God man. So it's a little alarming that someone in the church would have such a notion, because it's in no way indicative of where the church is in her theology. Now, here I've mentioned perhaps very two strong pillars to this thinking, and I'm going to add a third. Our worship and liturgical life, all of it points to Christ God, right? And the celebration of his divinity and his humanity. This is seen in the hymns, in the prayers, in the liturgy itself. It's very character and direction, as well as in the artistic elements of the church, such as its iconography, from the time we even depict Christ as a child. So never in the mind of the church is this idea that Jesus it renounces, if you will, his divinity. It's just not even thought of. Rather, fully God, fully man in one person has always been the perspective and dogmatic defense of Christ. Now, on top of that is the whole biblical record. Time and again within the scriptures, we see that Jesus Christ, the person, is both a human being and God. I give you an example, the Transfiguration, where we see the divinity of Christ shine through. So there's that. Okay, let's move to this idea of authority. It is noted, and we're doing a study in Luke's gospel right now in my parish, and you can pick that up here in Ancient Faith, called Transforming Our Lives in Christ. And we talk about the power that Jesus Christ exhibits. We're just in chapter 7 now, and came to his raising of the widow's son in Nain. And Jesus Christ raises this child, or this young man, I should say. And in this text, he doesn't first call upon the Father or even the Holy Spirit. He just acts. Now, look, very quickly the church would hasten to say any act of Christ, any act of the Father, any act of the Spirit is an act in which the Father and the Spirit are present. But Jesus Christ has power. Exousia is the Greek. He also has authority. He has the ability to lay down his life, he says, and take it up once again. Yet never does the Son act without the Father or with the Spirit. That's the very reality of being a communal or Trinitarian God. You know, it's three persons, right, of one essence, but distinct in their personhood. So, you know, that's a confusing question or a confusing statement he's making when he says, you know, Jesus Christ could only act through the authority of the Father. Well, in a sense, the Trinity is always acting in let's say, agreement with one another. Yet to deny the authority and power of Jesus Christ is once again to miss the whole biblical record. I mean, we don't have an ability to get behind or around the text. And we see time and again, whether it's in his healing of the paralytic, whether it's his walking on the waters, whether it's his multiplication of the loaves in the wilderness, whether it's his restoration of sight to the blind, the raising of the widow Nain, the raising of Lazarus, the raising of Jairus' daughter. I could go on. Christ acts with power and authority. And so, you know, both of these ideas, very dangerous ideas if one's, let's say, within the church. I think if one's outside of the church and questions, and, you know, even in a sense to be in the church and question, like, did Christ really have authority and power to do what he did? Or was he constantly just a conduit for the Father? This is a destructive viewpoint because it fails to see that each person of the Trinity is fully God. I mean, we say this in the Creed, you know, even about Jesus Christ, which is back to the other point, you know, about our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So, Bogdan, thank you for asking the question on behalf of your friend. I hope this answer is helpful. If not, feel free to call us back and let us know, okay? Once again, you're listening to Orthodoxy Live here on Ancient Faith Radio. If you'd like to get into the program, we do have a couple of open lines at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-AF-Radio. I've got a tickle in my throat. I need to take a short break and drink some water. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back, and Stavros will be with you in just a moment.
Orthodoxy Live with Father Evan will be back in a moment. In the meantime, lines are open at 1-855-AF-Radio. That's 1-855-237-2346.
Hi, this is Father Evan Armatas, priest at St. Spiridon Greek Orthodox Church in Loveland, Colorado, and the host of the Ancient Faith Radio Sunday night call-in show Orthodoxy Live. I am pleased to announce today the release of my first book for Ancient Faith Publishing, titled Toolkit for Spiritual Growth, a practical guide to prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. It seeks to provide a guide to the three basic and primary disciplines of Orthodox spirituality. Through these disciplines, Christ opened for us a path that frees us from the disordered way of life that has become normal for many, even though their hearts and minds tell them otherwise. Please join me in exploring the three-legged stool of Orthodox spiritual practice, prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Books now available at store.ancientfaith.com. And the title, once again, is Toolkit for Spiritual Growth. I look forward to sharing it with you. God bless.
Orthodox music, lectures, prayers, and more on Ancient Faith Radio. Thanks for your support.
Father Evan is ready for your call, and our lines are open at 1-855-AF-Radio. That's 1-855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Evan.
Well, welcome back to the program. As our announcer said, we've got a couple open lines. We're going to go out to the phones. Stavros, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Father.
Welcome, Stavros. You just had your feast day last Monday.
I did.
Many years to you. So for those of you listening in tonight and you're wondering, what does Father Evan mean when he says, well, you just had your feast day? So your name, Stavros, is the Greek word for cross. And often in the tradition of the church, we take upon ourselves names related to Jesus Christ. So my wife's name is Resurrection, Anastasia. But we can take on names like agape, love, or hope, or faith, and mercy. And so Stavros, you have this beautiful name. Stavros means cross. And this last Monday on the 14th of September, every year the church celebrates the feast of the elevation of the cross. So Stavros, welcome to the program. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Omaha, Nebraska.
Get out. Omaha. I have to tell you a family story. So when my dad's side, when they came over from Greece, first landed in Omaha, and they had a child that was suffering from, a lung ailment. So their doctor at the time, this is turn of the century, said, well, you need to move out to a farm. So they went to Baird, Nebraska. So there's an Orthodox community out there still. But so are you from Omaha, Stavros?
I'm from Omaha, yeah, born and raised here.
Oh, what parish?
St. John the Baptist.
St. John. So that's the parish that's downtown, is that right?
That's right downtown.
And the priest's name, once again, Father, escaping my mind.
Father Pete Pathis, we have.
That's right. Gosh, it's an old temple, Jewish temple, as I remember, synagogue. Is that right?
Yep.
And how long have you guys had that building?
So our church's founding date was the parish started in 1908, but we got the building in the 1950s, something in there.
Okay. What a beautiful temple it is. It's just absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, it's amazing. We're lucky to have it.
Yeah, I've been to Omaha a few times in my life. I was there, it's been a few years now, giving a talk at your sister parish, All Holy Spirit, in Omaha. And I just love Omaha. What a wonderful city. Great people and pretty town.
I agree with you.
Nice place to live.
Yeah, it's been a good place to grow up. To grow up.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, Stavros, tell us your question. Thanks for calling.
So, and thanks for taking my call. My mom actually had you on, and then she ran over to me when she heard you talking about C.S. Lewis because I'm a big fan of his. And,
really?
Yeah, big fan. So I took a course in college. I went to school out in Boston and took my junior year a philosophy and theology course on his works.
By Kraft.
Kraft, yep. That was my professor.
I went to Boston College.
Indeed. Say it again?
I went to Boston College.
Did you really?
Yeah, what year did you get out, Stavros?
I just graduated 2019 undergrad.
Oh, so Dr. Peter Kraft's still teaching, huh?
Indeed he is.
So funny. So when I was in college, I was in the Carroll School of Management there, and I took a class on C.S. Lewis and his writings from Dr. Peter Kraft, and I remember
the same exact class.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very popular course. I mean, he had one of the big lecture halls. He just packed it because he was such a, he's a C.S. Lewis scholar, and he's a great lecturer. And I'll never forget, we were in the middle of a lecture, 220 undergrads in there, and he asked some question about the Trinity. And, I'm a sophomore or whatever I was. I raised my hand, and he called on me, which he didn't often take, questions or comments from his, students. And I made a statement. I said, well, the Holy Trinity, that's simple. It's three persons in one essence. And he stopped and he said, what are you? And I was like, and I remember thinking, he's not asking me, am I human? So I was like, I'm an Orthodox Christian. And he goes, yes. It was pretty cool.
That sounds like him. That sounds like him. He hasn't changed much, I don't think.
Well, and then I took him from like St. Augustine's Confessions, and I had him for some seminar courses. It was great. So what did you study at BC?
I studied political science. And then sort of towards the end, finished it up early, and towards the end took more philosophy and theology-based courses. And that was my favorite class in undergrad, without a doubt.
For sure. And then, did you live in the mods your senior year? Or?
Unfortunately, I did not get a mod.
Where did you live?
I was in Rubenstein Hall.
Rubenstein, is that new?
No, it's old.
I don't know Rubenstein. Why don't I know that? Where is it?
Yeah, well, it's nothing too special, but it's a job.
Well, Stavros, it's great to have you on the call. It's nice to have a fellow Eagle. I don't get many calls from Screaming Eagles, but we can reminisce for probably the rest of the program. We probably shouldn't, though. So
I don't want to take up too much more of your time.
No, I'm happy to have the call and happy to have a fellow alumnus.
All right. So my question is, with C.S. Lewis kind of in mind, your discussion, a question that I like to hear, especially Orthodox, Greek Orthodox clergymen's perspective on, is sort of what role non-gospel and saint stories can have in our faith lives. I grew up in the Greek Orthodox Church and kind of had different, my relationship with like the gospel stories and different saints developed as I got older. But the C.S. Lewis books, for example, especially his fiction and fantasy, really just hit me right when I was in college.
Yeah,
and led me and really strengthened my Greek Orthodoxy.
Amen.
So I wanted to ask you what your opinion was about those types of stories and the roles that they can play, sort of how we can situate them in our spirituality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, Stavros, I feel like I'm talking to myself when I was, my 20s, because I had the same experience. I mean, that class that I took with Dr. Kraft, I would attribute to the trajectory my life, to a degree. The trajectory my life took, eventually going to get my master's in theology and then a master's in divinity and on to, ordained ministry and serving in the church. That was a pivotal class for me because I was exposed to literature that was, subtly and overtly Christian, and especially the works of C.S. Lewis, whether it be, I remember reading Perelandria and coming into contact with the idea of spiritual warfare, and I was terrified. I remember reading his autobiography, Surprised by Joy, and that story really touched me, or Screwtape Letters, or, The Problem of Pain, or Mere Christianity. All of his works really had a profound impact on me. And, I still use a lot of his works in my own catechisms when I'm teaching people. But there are other things I've drawn, both Orthodox and non-Orthodox, that I've utilized for sure. Because I think whether it's Tolkien, who plays with the themes that are, who's Gollum? But us, possessed by something physical that distorts and disfigures us. This is the gospel story, right? And his liberation, right? And just all of that, the journey that the Hobbit's on. It's a pilgrimage. So I think, great literature. Look at Dostoevsky. Tolstoy. There are many people in my church who've come to the church because they've read the great Russian novelists. They've encountered for the first time Orthodoxy, and let's say the brothers Karamazov.
Yeah.
And there are a number. I've got in my parish several teachers now from a classical school. And I can think of one in particular who teaches British Lit and American Lit, and through the great literature of the Western world have come to the church. So I think there's a huge reason for incorporating and utilizing. Jane Eyre. Have you read Jane Eyre?
I have not. I need to.
Read it, because that is a hagiography. That is a picture of a saint, told in a novel, and she does an exquisite job of describing it. Or do you remember have you read the French novel with this chapter on the bishop whose silver is stole? Oh gosh, someone help me. What is it? It's a famous novel. Why can't I read it?
Are you thinking Les Miserables?
Yes. Thank you. Have you read that?
I've never gotten around to reading the book, but I knew it because of the musical.
Oh, read just even the chapter on the bishop and how he acts towards the main character. It's truly exquisite, and so yeah, I think there's this wide range of literature that we can draw upon, and contemporary things as well. Or there's a recent book that I read called Father Joe. I think it came out in the last decade, and it tells the story of one of, I think, the band members of Meatloaf, who started meeting with this Catholic priest, and how it changed his life. So yeah, Stavros, I think there's wonderful things out there. Of course, there are wonderful stories within the church too. Scott Cairn's got a great book called, gosh, my brain is not working tonight. A Short Trip to the Edge. Check it out. It's a great book.
I'll write it down.
Yeah, another book by Kyriakos Makridis called The Mountain of Silence. Another great book that just tells the story of someone who goes on a trip and, on his trip meets, a monk, and they start talking, and he records these conversations, and it's great literature. It's a great story. It's a travel novel, So yeah, I think that there's plenty outside of the narrative in the Gospels that can draw us to Christ and contribute to our spiritual growth, for sure.
Well, great. I really appreciate your perspective on that.
Well, I hope you'll call in again.
I will. I will.
Great to chat some more about this.
If you spark I definitely will. Any other questions I got, I'll call in.
All right, Stavros. God bless. Let us know how you're doing, okay?
All right, Father.
Okay. Barakolo. Bye-bye. We're going to go out to Kevin as Stavros drops off. Again, you're listening to Orthodoxy Live here on Ancient Faith Radio. If you'd like to get in the call, it's 1-855-237-2346. Kevin, welcome to the program.
Hello, Father Evan.
Hey, welcome. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from California.
Okay, so we have to ask, where? Are you guys safe and sound? What's going on?
Oh, it's a little smoky, but by the grace of God, I am safe. And I just have to make a little correction. My name is actually Evan. Although
that's so funny. Oh, my gosh.
I've been called Kevin a few times by error yourself.
Oh, holy crap. Cow. It's so funny. I literally was there's a neighbor boy and just a few houses down, and I was dropping something off at his parents' house, and he came out because he's, home, doing online schooling, and his name's Evan, and I always joke with him. I always say, hey, Evan, great name, keep it up. It'll never do you wrong. And then his parents were out, and we were joking. I said, what's so funny is I said, how many people get Evan wrong? And they were like, really? And I said, oh, Kevin is like, I constantly get Kevin, and I'm like, I don't know how they get that from Evan or even, E-V-E-N. Do you get that one?
Yeah, even. Oh, yeah, I used to get even. Yeah.
Or they put an S on the end, Evans.
Yeah, or Evans. Yes, that's right. No, and when I was young, I don't know how old you are, Father Evan, but I'm in my early 40s, and it was a pretty rare name when I was a kid. And it's definitely become more common.
Yeah, I've got you beat because I'm 51, and certainly when I was a kid, I only had ever met one other Evan, and it's Welsh for John. I don't know if you know that.
Yes, definitely.
But I got my name by way of my Greek mother not wanting me to go through life with a name no one could say, because my name is Evangelos. And so she shortened it.
Shortening.
Yeah, Evan. Made it easy. So, well, welcome to the program. And we're in California?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I live in Grass Valley, California. So we're in the Sierra Nevada foothills.
I see. Okay.
And it has been very smoky all year. Thankfully, it's let up a bit, and we are blessed not to be on fire. I have many friends that are affected by the fires.
Yes.
But we are thankful that we're still here, and we only have about 2 months to go in the fire season. So
I know, so crazy. Well, love to hear your question.
I mean, it is something that happens. It happens every year here,
right?
Because I mean, to a greater or lesser extent, but it just doesn't rain here for about 6 months. So,
well, we're at the foothills of the Rockies here in Fort Collins, and the same's going on.
Oh,
and
nice.
we're in the midst of a fire season. We've got a massive fire just west of town called the Cameron Peak Fire, and raining ash. And some days you're driving in the middle of the day, and your lights in your car turn on because it's and the temperature drops 20 degrees. And then another fire just started up near the Medicine Bow. It's really terrible. I mean, it's so dry right now, and it stayed so dry and so hot all of summer. I mean, almost every day was over 90, which never happens in Colorado.
Yeah. Well, you usually get a little bit of rain off and on there in the Rockies. I lived in Boulder for a time.
Yeah.
But
we haven't gotten this year. Not this year.
We've definitely been praying in our church for all the people who are affected by the fires.
Amen.
And hopefully, of course, obviously, fall and winter will come, and we will all get through it the best that we can.
Yeah.
My question for you, Father Evan, was this whole Corona situation and the churches being shut down. I mean, I'm lucky. I'm in a very small church, and we were not very affected by it.
Right.
But it's just something that I've been, obviously I'm concerned with it. And
sure.
I just was wondering what your take was on what all the different jurisdictions and bishops had to say and the church's reaction to
of course
all this has been going on.
Well, I appreciate the question, Evan, and the opportunity to, provide a perspective. Unlike the previous call from Germany, where I said, here's, something in which Father Evan's not going to give his opinion, but rather his, he's going to defend the dogmatic position of the church. That's not what's about to come out of my mouth. I have nothing here dogmatic to say. I have taken this again is just totally Father Evan's opinion. I'm not advocating one thing or the other. Yeah. I've sort of taken a longer view, and that's as a result of my context. My family on my mother's side is from the Peloponnese, which is an area of Greece that was under Ottoman rule until the late 1800s, early 1900s. Okay, my father-in-law on my wife's side, he grew up in Istanbul, Constantinople, and his family underwent the genocide that Turkey perpetrated against the Christians in and around Constantinople and Asia Minor. He was part of the forced
the Armenian genocide.
Yeah, but there's also with that besides the Armenians, where we've got over 1 million Armenian Christians killed, massacred, genocide that the Nazis themselves studied. We also have several 100,000 Eastern Orthodox Christians also that were massacred. A great genocide, and then a forced relocation of entire villages and populations of Christians. Over 2 million Orthodox Christians lived in the city. In the turn of the century, I think there's 2,000 left. Where do they go?
Yeah.
So I bring this up because I was raised in a family that underwent not only that, but also World War II, where the local churches were closed by the Nazis. Sometimes the priests were arrested or killed. The churches were burned. The villagers were tortured if they continued in their faith. And so my view of this current situation and the various responses different jurisdictions have taken to it is a bit longer, in the sense that I go, well, whatever inconvenience or incorrect decisions or correct decisions were made, it'll all sort of get worked out once we get over this sort of current crisis, just like it did or has in the past history of the church. And, I am firmly convinced that there is no earthly power that will ever close the church. Coronavirus isn't even close to communism. Coronavirus isn't even close to Nazi Germany.
Absolutely. I mean,
right.
Obviously the gates of hell will not prevail against the church.
Nope.
And as you said, I mean, I would agree with if I may, I would agree with what you said. In that, yeah, I mean we have an older Russian man in my church who's wonderful and has really been inspiring to me, and he's taught me so many stories of that time period.
Right.
And so I know for him that experience has sort of had the shades of that, where he remembers as a young boy going to the church and all the crosses were broken. And
yes.
But like you said, it's we're not on that sort of level.
No.
Currently in this, in our place. I just worry when I see that perhaps, that, and then of course the communists running rampant in the streets. It reminds the people that have lived through, they lived through the Bolsheviks, for example, and it reminds them of that sort of time that was happening.
It can. Yeah, the other thing is, look, some people have become concerned about certain bishops and bishops' decisions, and bishops are not infallible. We don't have popes in the church. We never have, and individual bishops make mistakes. And
I guess my question would be, or another question I would have would be, it's hard because as an Orthodox Christian, I want to respect the hierarchy. I want to respect my priests and my bishops and the whole hierarchy of the church. But then there is the question of, if you could look at the current schism between Moscow and Constantinople and the pushing of ecumenism. At what point do we say something, or obviously if there's heresy involved, I feel ambivalent about that as a layperson within the faith, because I want to be respectful to the hierarchy, and I have no problem within my own church, or I have very much respect for my priests. But I feel like that's something that's been troubling a lot of Christians.
Yes, it has been.
Don't agree with all of this locking down, and we must wear masks and not be close to each other, sort of thing. I was interested in your take on that, Father Evan.
I think, again, with that, I've been very clear with my own community that I'm going to follow what my bishop tells me, that I don't believe that there's another option for me as a parish priest. But that doesn't mean that I am doing so without giving my bishop my honest perspective. And, my bishop every Tuesday has had meetings with clergy, and the clergy have been very clear about our concerns and thoughts and feelings. And our bishop has listened, and he's adjusted his protocols based on what we have discussed with him. And I've encouraged the faithful in my own parish. Most recently, someone came to me with something they were very troubled about regarding the church. And I said, well, let's write to the bishop. Let's hear what the bishop has to say. Now, I think that's the way that we should handle it, in a loving dialogue. And I think we should also have that longer view that we will, this all happened so fast. And no one even had, 5 minutes to think through maybe some decisions they were making. And everybody was doing their best. I don't believe there's some sort of secret conspiracy within the church to sort of denude the church of her spiritual vigor and position. And I do think that time and again, when we look at the activity of the Holy Spirit within the church, she has provided the corrective, or, the Holy Spirit has provided the corrective to the church when needed. And I think that'll happen again. So I just, like I said at the beginning, I have a longer view, and I think, it'll work itself out. And I'm not trying to be naive or Pollyannish about it.
No, certainly. I respect what you have to say, Father Evan, and I definitely agree. I agree with you. I don't think that there is a conspiracy within the church. I do, however, believe that there is a conspiracy outside of the church.
There could be, for sure.
The church has to be wary of that, because I do think that, especially in areas where the church is powerful, say in, the Eastern European countries, there's always going to be a concerted effort to try to influence, to try to infiltrate and influence that power that they have. But I agree. I don't think there is, and I'm so thankful that we're not Roman Catholics, and that we don't have a pope, and that when, people in high office become corrupt, then we're able to, talk about that and hopefully correct that situation.
Yeah. Well, Evan, other than getting your name wrong, it's absolutely been wonderful to have you on the show.
Well, wonderful to talk to you, Father Evan. Thank you so much for your time, and God bless you.
Thank you, Evan. Good night. Nico, hold on a minute before we get out to you. I want to take a question that came into us while we've been on at Orthodoxy Live at ancientfaith.com. It comes from Justina. Thank you, Father Evan, for all that you do. I have a question that I am currently grappling with. I currently belong to the Oriental Orthodox Church, but my husband is pushing me towards joining the Antiochian Orthodox Church as he considers it to be a fuller expression of the Orthodox faith. I don't believe that my belief or theology is lacking in the Oriental Church, although I do admit that in practice, there are a number of issues in our current church practices, such as clericalism, lack of emphasis on iconography, inconsistency in the quality of Orthodox preaching, and other issues with the competency of church leaders, etc. How do I make the decision to leave or stay? Do I have a responsibility to the church of my heritage? How do I determine if the issues are severe enough for us to jump ship, quote unquote? Any assistance would be much appreciated. Thank you, and God bless, Justina. Well, dear Justina, thank you for asking such a delicate question, and I appreciate the trust that you put in my response. I have to walk very gently here because I think we must be careful in our conversations and dialogue when it comes to a family member that is in the Oriental Church, the Oriental Orthodox Church. You don't mention exactly where, whether that might be in the Coptic Orthodox Church or such, but you know, there's a lot of dialogue that has occurred through the centuries, obviously, between the Oriental Orthodox and the Eastern Orthodox churches. You mention your husband's desire, and I'm assuming here that he is also Oriental Orthodox, because later on you talk about us jumping ship. So I'm assuming he also is Oriental Orthodox. You know, for a long time in the parishes in America, there has been a very close relationship between those, let's say, who come from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. And I grew up worshiping in a parish in which the Ethiopian Orthodox, who are part of what we call the Oriental Orthodox, worship side by side with Eastern Orthodox. And most of our hierarchy has come to understand, and certainly the theological distinction between the two churches has been described by many as a family argument, and not so much a schism. And so the reception into the Eastern Orthodox Church is not, if you will, maybe as harsh as you might place it, Justine, and it isn't as if you would be leaving the church of your heritage and joining a separate or different church. Your husband may have a view of this that could be helpful, that in a sense you're stepping more fully into your Orthodox heritage, more fully into the expression of your Orthodox faith. Not that you have something deficient, but perhaps we could say this in a positive way, that you have something to gain. And you know, that's not to say that, you know, there was a recent series of lectures given at St. Vladimir's by Oriental Orthodox theologians from Egypt that was quite exquisite and wonderful. And listening to the lectures gave me an even greater appreciation for the spiritual history, the spiritual traditions, the robust reality of our brothers and sisters who have lived and defended and promulgated the Oriental Orthodox traditions. But I think it's my sincere hope and desire, of course I don't have any official capacity here, that this family division will cease. And certainly, as I said, the way into Orthodoxy, Eastern Orthodoxy from Oriental Orthodoxy, is usually, in many places, simply a confession of faith. It does, depending on the bishop, and I would say check with the bishop that's local, how that might occur. in terms of the decision to leave or stay, I would say, why don't you attend that local parish, the Antiochian Orthodox Church that's nearby, and worship there for some time. See if you can meet with the parish priest. If you have children, see if you as a family are welcomed, and if this is something that would be a good transition for your family. And I think, when it comes to whether or not these issues are severe enough, which is your question, as an Eastern Orthodox priest, certainly I have the perspective that the fullness of the faith is found within the embrace of the Eastern Orthodox Church. But as I said at the beginning of my comments, I say this with a great deal of compassion, patience, peace, and love, because I don't want to call the brothers and sisters that I know and have met in the Oriental Orthodox Church deficient, nor do I want to say that there are these severe problems. Those dogmatic issues that theologians have argued over, some would say have been reconciled, some would say no, they still exist. I'm not at that level because I'm not part of these interchurch conversations, and I'm not a theologian writing on these topics, and I'm not a historian who understands them in great depth. But I do think not only the issues you've raised, but the overall life of the church you might find to be a fuller expression within your local parish. And perhaps, again, it's not looking as severing one relationship, but rather a stepping forward. I hope I've helped, Justina. Thanks for writing in such a difficult question. And I hope I've not caused any scandal for anyone in my response. We're going to go back out to the phone. Nico, we've just got a few minutes left. Where are you calling from?
Hello, Father Armatas. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome.
Great. Well, I'm calling from Omaha, Nebraska. Excuse me.
Okay, welcome. I'd love to hear your question.
I do want to know how your great-grandfather got the name of Armatas, but I think that's better for another time.
You bet. Another time. Well, tell me your question.
Okay. So in his 2020 history of the Greek Archdiocese of America, Haverford professor Alexander Ketroev writes that the Archdiocese is an ethno-religious institution.
Okay.
This is because the Church has absorbed the theology, the organizations providing social services to the Greek population. So this is why, for example, Greek schools are controlled by the Archdiocese.
Right.
So this is important because, as the Orthodox population scholar Victor Rudamadov from the University of Cyprus has written, the existence of the Greek population in the United States today is most threatened not by acculturation into the U.S. mainstream, but by the Archdiocese's shift to a universalist institution. And we're seeing this in many cities. The local parish stops vigorously serving the Greek population, and the population splinters. And this is very serious as we're speaking about the survival of a minority group in America.
Well, Nico, I appreciate your distinction. A question. I don't know if are you just kind of sharing some thoughts?
I'd like to hear your thoughts on this issue.
Well, I think that, I won't necessarily have to rely on my own thoughts. I guess I would say that the councils of the church have ruled ethnicity or ethnocentrism as a heretical position. That when the church, becomes concerned with a specific population and ethnicity and serves, sort of in a parochial way, that population, then it is stepped away from its true mission. Christ came to baptize, he shares this great commission with his disciples to baptize all nations. And so the archdiocese, and here specifically the Greek archdiocese, if it is to be within the great commission of Christ, cannot reduce itself to an ethnically centered church. It cannot be focused on simply the ethnic issues of, let's say, a diaspora, but rather it must expand its view of church to one of serving humanity and the gospel, right? So, that's not necessarily, as I said, Father Evan's perspective. That's the theology or the ecclesiology of the church. Now, my perspective is that within the expression of Orthodoxy in America, it has often been reduced to an ethnocentric vision, and it's lost its true vision. And this is of course not only dangerous but fatal, because St. Paul confronted St. Peter over the very issue of becoming ethnocentric, when he confronted him in the gospel about circumcision in the New Testament. And Peter had a specific view of the Great Commission, and St. Paul reminded him of the essential view. So it's important. The question you're bringing up is important, and I believe that the Church has a responsibility to provide the gospel and the truth of the gospel and the fullness of the faith to every human being on the face of the planet, regardless of race, color, or creed. That's what I believe.
Thank you, Father. Would you mind if I asked you a brief follow-up?
Okay.
Thanks for your thoughts. And I'd like to ask a direct question, given the severity of the issue. I do think it's serious. Archbishop Athenagoras established the dual mission of the Archdiocese: to preserve Greek Orthodoxy and to preserve Greek ethnicity. He stated this clearly on many occasions, including in his 1970 letter to the faithful. Are you suggesting that Archbishop Athenagoras designed a heretical church?
I wouldn't say that he designed a heretical church. I don't think that's what he probably had in view at the time. He probably had a view of, the church's mission incorporating the preservation of, let's say, Greek identity and culture and Hellenism. And certainly we know that the Archdiocese has for many years supported Greek language schools, Greek cultural schools, right? I think that's contextual probably to his time and place. I think as we step out of that viewpoint and sort of this isn't a degrading statement, but an immigrant point of view, and we see really the church's mission is not to preserve an identity within the diaspora, but rather it's to take up its great commission given to it by Christ. I'm not trying to pit myself against Archbishop Athenagoras. I'm really just sharing where is the gospel and what does the gospel ask of us. It's too short of a view, it's too small of a view to say that the church's mission is only these two things. And I think rather it should be that the church's mission is only this. Now, can the church have other priorities? Of course it can, but not if they take away from its central mission. I guess that would be my perspective. So, Nico, I appreciate the call. Great and difficult questions, and I appreciate it. We're past our hour, though, so I got to get off.
Thank you, Father Armatas.
You bet, Nico. Bye-bye. Well, you've been listening to Orthodoxy Live here on Ancient Faith Radio. I'm glad you've been with us and hope to hear from you again, or call in if you haven't had a chance to in the future. I hope you'll check out my new book, Toolkit for Spiritual Growth, and join us for a book study on that on the first Sunday of the month. The second hour of Orthodoxy Live will be added in October, November, December. We'll be joined by Alyssa Bielatich, my good friend and host of Everyday Orthodox, as we go through that book study together. We'll be back next Sunday, and we look forward to hearing from you then. For Ancient Faith Radio and Orthodoxy Live, I'm Father Evan. Good night, and God bless.